Alright, let's go. The Eagles are headed to the jungle to take on the Bengals. And even though they've never won there, I'll give you a couple reasons why that could change Sunday. Like Jalen Hurts having an opportunity to take over the game versus Cincy's defense, as well as Vic Fangio's plan to limit Joe Burrow, and also how a recent incident in practice has led to Philly's defense waking up. Plus, Maxx Crosby was recently linked to the Eagles. However, it doesn't sound like he's in on that situation. So let's talk about that and other more realistic options on Howie's radar. But first, let's run it. What's up, guys? So I'm just going to go ahead and say this. I'm a little bit scared that the Eagles might lose to the Bengals this week whenever they...
You could trouble me for a warm glass of shut the hell up.
Okay, fine. I don't actually think we will lose, but it's no doubt going to be one of the more difficult tests the Eagles have had this season. By the way, I'm just going to go ahead and put this out there. If the Eagles beat the Bengals, I will give away any jersey of your choice to one person hanging out in the live stream immediately following the game. So feel free to mark your calendars or set a reminder so you don't miss out on the opportunity, and swing on by the stream during the game. Now, like I said, it's going to be difficult, because the Eagles haven't ever won in Cincinnati with a record of 0-4-1 all time. Plus, despite Cincy starting out to the tune of Burrow in 3, they're certainly better than their 3-4 record suggests. Of course, yeah, I understand if you want to say the Jungle Cats' only wins are versus the abysmal teams like the Carolina Panthers, New York Giants, and Cleveland Browns. However, this is a team that should have beaten Baltimore and still took them to overtime before losing late. Also, regardless of how you feel about that, Joe Burrow is third in the NFL in passer rating, boasting a 14-2 touchdowns to interception ratio. Which, by the way, the offense's efficiency for the Bengals has continued to get better as they've steadily utilized 12 personnel to get a little bit better blocking. But the biggest area of attack, not surprisingly, is what Ja'Marr Chase is doing, as the Cincy receiver entered Week 8 as the league leader in receiving yards and touchdowns, with 6 scores from Chase coming from 41 yards, 31 yards, 63, 41 again, 70, and 18 yards. Oh yeah, and Tee Higgins on the opposite side is playing some of the best football of his career as well.
Is that supposed to make me feel better?
No, I guess not, but I do have some good news for you. Because Vic Fangio has a history of shutting down Burrow's Bengals. I mean, it has been a while, but the year Cincinnati ended up making it to the Super Bowl, Fangio was with Denver, where Joe Burrow was held to just 157 yards and 1 touchdown while being sacked 3 times. Although, yeah, unfortunately, it wasn't enough as the Bengals QB found Tyler Boyd for 56 yards to go up 15-10 with 30 seconds to play. But come on, Vic was working with an offense that had Teddy Bridgewater and Drew Lock trying to throw to Noah Fant and Albert O. Yes, you're thinking of the right Albert O, the one that's in Philly now, led the team in receiving that game with 58 yards. Anyway, the bigger point to this is that in that game, Ja'Marr Chase and Tee Higgins combined for 3 catches for 26 yards. So look, if you can get anything close to that, then the Eagles are going to win the game. Of course, I should mention that Higgins popped up on the injury report with a quad injury and is now questionable for the game. So that'll definitely make things more difficult for Chase if he can't go. Yet either way, Fangio's not overlooking the Bengals.
You start with Joe Burrow, Chase, and Higgins, and those are big-time players at their positions, top of the line, and they've been running the ball better this year, so, you know, they're really good. You know, they scored a bunch of points against Baltimore, lost to 1 point. I think it was 26 or 27, 26 against Kansas City. They're really good.
Not a surprise, but this should be a really good test for the secondary. And personally, I can't wait to see how Q does whenever he's matched up with Chase. Although I'd also expect Cooper Dejean and Slay to get several looks since the Bengals move him all over the field. However, the area we might see the Birds go feasting, according to Jimmy Kempski, is the pass rush, as starting left tackle Orlando Brown suffered a calf injury last week against Cleveland, but is expected to play this week. Granted, it's likely not going to be 100%. And then on the opposite side at right tackle, you have Amarius Mims, who obviously has a ton of potential. However, he's still a little green as a rookie and could potentially have some trouble. Or heck, when you look at the interior of the O-line, Cincinnati's been in the top half of pressures allowed. So seeing that Philly's pass rush has been gaining momentum with 13 sacks in the last 2 weeks, it's not that far-fetched to think we could see the D-line feast. Which is honestly the perfect segue into the sponsor of today's video, Good Chop, because I don't know about you guys, but our grocery bills lately have been insane. And after starting CrossFit and trying to live a healthier lifestyle, the appetite and protein intake has pretty much skyrocketed.
I am going to have that 3rd steak after all. Go ahead and put that order in now, please and thank you.
Here's the problem. We started to go to the store to look at different options, but unfortunately, those options either had hormones or antibiotics in them, or they were just so expensive for scraps that it really felt like a waste of money.
I think I'd like my money back.
And that is why we turned to Good Chop. Because Good Chop offers fully customizable boxes of high-quality meat and seafood that they'll deliver right to your front door on your schedule. The products are also vacuum sealed and flash frozen at peak freshness, so you can stock your freezer and cook whenever you want. The best part is we can choose from over 70 high-quality cuts that are free from hormones and antibiotics and have it shipped right to our front door, saving us both time and money. Now, my favorite option is probably the New York strip or the ribeye, because I'm a turf and turf kind of guy. However, if you like the surf and turf options, they also do a dang good job with the crab legs. And the salmon's a huge hit with our girls. By the way, on the topic of the grocery store meats being a waste of money, Good Chop believes in their quality so much that they offer a 100% money-back guarantee. So either you love Good Chop or get your money back. Plus, right now, you can get your box of fully customized, high-quality meats and seafood by going to goodchop.com/YouTube and use code PhillySpecial130. Or click the link in the description down below to get $130 off across your first 4 boxes. Again, that's goodchop.com/YouTube and code PhillySpecial130 to get $130 off your first 4 boxes, or just scan the QR code. You know, while that deal is not fool's gold, I get the thinking from some people like, oh, the Eagles have just done it against the Browns and the Giants. And while that may be true, there was recently an incident at practice which I totally missed that apparently galvanized the squad. A shout out to Chris Franklin, who shared that Nakobe Dean told him the squad had an incident at practice coming out of the bye week that would have normally pulled teams apart. However, it had the opposite effect on the defense, as Nakobe admitted the group is now a much more cohesive unit, on the same page, playing for each other, and trusting Fangio as well as the other positional coaches a lot more. Now, yeah, I would love to know exactly what that incident is, but still, just to see the group having some adversity and fighting through a little bit of toughness and everything there is definitely a benefit, which is why, call me crazy, but I'm more concerned in the offense than I am in the defense for the Eagles this week. I mean, the Bengals also have a significant mismatch in the trenches, with the Cincy defense not being what it was over the first 3 weeks. And Trey Hendrickson was playing good, but he's really been heating up as the Bengals defense has gotten healthier, as the 3-time Pro Bowler already has 7 sacks on the season, while also ranking 3rd with 60 sacks since 2020, right behind TJ Watt with 66.5 and Myles Garrett, who has 62 sacks. So yeah, that's pretty rare air. And when you consider that Fred Johnson was beat pretty bad early in the game against the Giants by Brian Burns, let's just say hopefully Philly has a focus for number 91 to limit his impact. Because remember, say what you will about Jalen Hurts, but he's been one of the most accurate and efficient quarterbacks when he's given time. It's just when he's felt any pressure at all, he experiences the biggest drop-off in the league in terms of production. Again, obviously, he's got to get better in that area, certainly utilizing the middle of the field more, dealing with pressure, stepping out of the pocket, all of that. But this is a game where QB1 could do just that, although that will most likely mean using his legs on occasion too, since the Bengals have allowed the most rushing yards per game to opposing quarterbacks. And while they've also given up the quick game with passes over the middle, they've not allowed many explosive plays. In fact, Cincinnati's given up the fewest plays of 20 yards or more this season. Yet you know it and I know it. That does not mean the Eagles are not going to try that.
It takes, a ton of reps. It takes a ton of study, and Jalen's done so much of that to, and he knows how important it is to take care of the football, but he also knows how important it is to win the explosive play battle. So that's not something where, hey, that's what we talk about each week. Hey, let's win the explosive play battle and let's win the turnover battle. Well, a lot of that falls on his shoulders of being able to push the ball when it needs to be pushed.
That really is the question. Can Jalen Hurts find that balance and not try to do too much? I mean, don't worry. He's still going to have his chances with A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith. After all, the Bengals secondary is banged up, plus as much as Cam Taylor-Britt likes to talk, he ranks near the very bottom in terms of passer rating allowed. And then DJ Turner has had his size picked on more than a couple times. So it wouldn't surprise me if the Eagles immediately go his way if AJ's ever got that matchup, especially considering Turner is 5'11", 185, whereas A.J. Brown is 6'1", 225. But look, this game is crucial for a couple reasons. I mean, for one, yes, it builds the momentum, it keeps the confidence up with the squad. However, more importantly, it'll probably solidify Howie Roseman being a buyer at the trade deadline. Now, I don't know how big of a buyer, but according to The Athletic's Dianna Russini and Jacob Robinson, they proposed a hypothetical trade of Maxx Crosby for the Eagles' first-round pick this year, along with a 4th, 5th, and 2026 second-rounder. Again, it's just a hypothetical, but if that were the asking price, you absolutely make that trade. But coming back to reality, Crosby made it pretty clear he doesn't want to be traded.
I got to address it with my teammates. You know what I mean? I'm like, I'm not trying to leave. You know what I mean? I know it's a business. You know what I mean? I don't have 100% control, all that, but I want to be here. I want to be silver and black. I'll say it loud and clear. I want to be a Raider. I've said that over and over and over again. But yeah, it's business part of it too. I don't have 100% control of that, but I know at the end of the day, just seeing all the craziness, it's been insane.
Look, if Max wanted out, he could probably force his way out like Davante Adams did. It just doesn't seem realistic for him to be an option, especially when you think about the serious compensation to get a player like him. But on that note, I've gotten several questions recently about, okay, who's a realistic trade option then, in particular when it comes to the pass rush. So with that being the case, I decided to get NFL analyst Anthony DiBona on to provide serious options for the Eagles, as well as his thoughts on everything else around the Birds. You wrote a great article, and by the way, I've got a link in the description for people that are interested, but talking about potential trade targets, because we're getting closer, official trade deadline being November 5th, but getting closer to that, and then speculation, starts heating up of who should the Eagles go after, who are realistic targets, everything else. I asked you beforehand, hey, any potential targets, who'd you lean towards, things like that, because I'm curious. Lots of names, as I mentioned in the article, but Josh Uche, the name came up there, curious why, main potential there, and what you might see for Philly, how he would add to the team.
Yeah, so I mentioned about 10 names total at various different positions in the article, but Uche is kind of a guy that stands out to me because, he checks the box as an edge rusher that's versatile and has experience both covering and rushing the passer, which is something that I think the Eagles are going to look for if they do add somebody along the edge, because you got a couple of guys like Bryce Huff, Brandon Graham that, they do kind of drop in coverage here and there for Vic Fangio, but it's not really their specialty Uche is not the greatest at it, but he does have quite a bit of experience doing it. And he's still just 26 years old. He's on a 1-year deal, so you'd only be getting him for half the season or whatever it might be. But I just think the upside is there. He has a relationship with Brandon Graham because following their game against the Eagles last year, Uche actually gave his jersey to Brandon Graham. Brandon Graham talked about how they talk on the phone and how he was going to send him a jersey as well. So it seems like they kind of have a relationship that exists already as well. So I think that kind of plays into a factor when you're bringing somebody in like the middle of the season. So it's like you kind of don't want to bring somebody that nobody knows. You kind of want to have, especially if they're in that same position room. I think that helps a lot as far as like a mid-season kind of transition period, getting him acclimated. So I think he just checks a lot of boxes for the Eagles. And it seems like the Patriots, on the other hand, are kind of spiraling out of control. Gerard Mayo, they're 1-6. He's calling the team soft. And if he's on a 1-year deal and it seems like his role is already kind of declining a little bit, it seems like he could be a player that could be in play for the Eagles.
And also, obviously never great with the soft comments, players, hearing that from your head coach. But Uche, I believe, and Nolan Smith were at the Pass Rush Summit. I think back-to-back years. Certainly Nolan Smith's rookie year, but I think back-to-back years, if I'm not mistaken. So even a little extra, they're aware, familiar with each other. But like you mentioned, fits fairly well, a more realistic type of trade for Howie Roseman to do because of the compensation and what we can get into some maybe bigger blockbusters, what people might want. I'm not going to say the name yet, but we may get there. However, if you were to look at a trade like this for a Josh Uche, what compensation-wise, do you have a rough estimate? Like, hey, here's possibly about, kind of based on some other trades we've seen or what Howie Roseman's shown in the past, would he have to, you think, give up for a guy like Josh Uche?
Well, given his limited role that he's kind of playing for the Patriots right now, and he only has 2 sacks on the season, so it's not like they could really ask for a premium package for him because although he is a young kind of ascending player, he's only on, like I said, a 1-year deal, and he'll hit free agency after the year. So, and the Eagles, they don't really have a ton of like super late picks to work with in the 2025 NFL draft. So they do have 3 5th-round picks. So maybe they could work something out with one of those 5th-round picks for Uche and get him for a couple games. And then if things work out, they could either extend him in the offseason, or if he leaves, then they can probably get something like a compensatory pick, depending on what happens in free agency. So in that regard, that can kind of be something that happens there. But also, I kind of lean towards him as like the main guy to target because Zach Berman of PHLY, he mentioned him when Hassan Reddick initially requested a trade from the Eagles. He was listed with alongside Bryce Huff, who obviously the Eagles signed, and then Andrew Van Ginkel, who we know they were linked to because of his experience with Vic Fangio. So for him to be linked with those other names that one of them the Eagles already brought in, and Zach Berman's a very well-respected reporter, so if he kind of throws a name out there, I think it's worth paying attention to. And it seems like Uche is kind of a player that could be available. So it seems like overall, he's probably the most likely target among those players that I listed in the article.
And as you also said too, we could, not that we don't, BG, he's the best, he's the GOAT. But, BG lined up against Malik Neighbors. If it's Uche against a guy like that, it's not the best formula, but maybe
I don't think you want either one. I don't think you want either one out there.
I was shocked for people that have no clue. Most people I'm sure have seen it, but for people that no clue what I'm talking about. BG, we understand Fangio likes to drop back the edge rushers, like you mentioned. There was a particular rep where he was lined up out on the slot, basically lined up over Malik Neighbors. Don't love to see my pass rushers dropping back into coverage, but certainly to line up in the slot like a 36-year-old vet on Neighbors. Maybe we could have other options, but that's
the picture of them lined up across from each other is just so funny because it's like Brandon Graham looks like the biggest slot corner in the NFL, and then he's matched up against one of the hottest young receivers in the league. It's just like it's so hilarious. And the best part about it is Brandon Graham was probably like talking trash to him, being like, "Yeah, you're not going to get open," or something like that beforehand. So that just makes it infinitely better for anybody that knows like his personality.
Absolutely, yes. I mean, I don't know what off the top of his head, like 270, something like that. So the size alone, but yes, the fact that he was trash talking. But and this is a little bit off, but you like seeing Quinyon Mitchell from his impact on Malik Neighbors and, the kind of viral clip, just give him a little shoulder, right? There's no play coming over to Malik Neighbors in one of those in particular, but showing some physicality. So maybe a little bit more of, hey, let's have Q, let's have Cooper Dejean, let's have our secondary players over the receivers. If we need to drop back in coverage on a zone situation, okay. But ultimately, if we go after a trade, I want to see a pass rusher, someone who is predominantly rushing the passer as much as we can, because we do understand Vic Fangio likes to do that. It feels like we do have to bring this up, no matter how realistic this might or might not be. We'll start with Myles Garrett. That's the biggest name that I've seen. I mean, I've listed polls out there. People have comments all the time. You look at any tweet everywhere. If there's even a brief mention of Myles Garrett, it's like all of, Philly Kingdom is going crazy. And understandably so. Like, hey, Myles Garrett is Defensive Player of the Year for a reason, or former Defensive Player of the Year for a reason. The impact that he makes, everyone understands that. But then you had a recent report that came out, or a rumor, I should say, take it with a grain of salt these days right now around the trade deadline. A rumor that Eagles' interest potentially in Myles Garrett, maybe making calls. But then Albert Breer, who's a respected journalist, said that there is the likelihood that Howie Roseman will be making calls because, any player that's available, he's going to, at least see how much it might cost. But are you buying into the idea that does it go further than that, or is it, hey, Howie picking up the phone to call, his guy, what's his name, Andrew Berry, I believe, is that the GM for? Yeah, so he'd call Andrew Berry, say, hey man, we're good buddies. Like, well, what's it going to take for Myles Garrett, and then quickly go, okay, thanks, bye. That's not going to happen.
When he asked for their entire draft class of picks for the next 2 years,
it's all of it.
It's always funny to me to see especially with Howie Roseman, this team is calling around, or this that's their job. They're going to make those calls. And if you aren't calling about a player of Myles Garrett's caliber, I mean, what are you doing? Because if you're any of the other 31 teams, you could use Myles Garrett. I don't care who you have on your team already. That guy is just one of the best defensive players in the game for a reason. And if he is available, you have to check in and at least see what that cost is. But at the same time, although he is such a good player, I don't know if he would technically fit what they're looking for in Vic Fangio's defense, because in 8 seasons in the NFL, he only has 111 coverage snaps. So, I mean, granted, he's a phenomenal pass rusher. He's one of the best in the game. And I mean, if you can add him, you do whatever you can. But as far as a fit for this team in particular, I mean, granted, he's the talent that he is. Like I said, you just kind of make it work if you can get him. But I don't know if they're necessarily going to risk their entire future for a player like Myles Garrett.
That's fair. I mean, yeah. It's not what a lot of people want to hear. And even myself, because again, you say who wouldn't take Myles Garrett? Who on Madden isn't automatically making that trade and saying, hey, I'm going to give you a 5th round pick and here we go. Myles Garrett, we're going to force the trade. He automatically makes your team better. But realistically, the compensation you have to give up for one, combined with, like you're saying there, maybe not the best scheme fit. So that's why you say, realistically, we mentioned Josh Uche. You have several others in your article, which again, I got a link in the description if people want to go check that out. Maxx Crosby, though, the other name I do need to at least briefly throw out there because that's the other big name as far as trade targets, pass rushers that we've been seeing lately, especially because the Athletics, Dianna Russini, I believe Jacob Robertson, I believe, is the other reporter. But they kind of did an effort for just like hypothetical trades, basically. But they had an article there. Eagles were one of the teams, and Maxx Crosby was the hypothetical they threw out there for Howie Roseman to go trade for. And the compensation, I believe, was a 1st-round pick this year, a 2nd-round pick in 2026, as well as this year's, I think, 4th and 5th-round pick, if I'm not mistaken. Something to that effect. I mean, decent compensation, but not anything crazy. Twofold question to that, though, a reaction. I mean, one, if that's what it were to cost for Maxx Crosby, do you make that trade? And then the second part to that, though, is how realistic is any sort of trade for Maxx Crosby anyway?
So one is, yes, you immediately accept that trade and do it right away, because Maxx Crosby, I mean, he's kind of viewed in that same caliber as Myles Garrett, maybe a little bit below him, but he's just as good of a player. But similar to Myles Garrett, he's a guy that's never really used in coverage. And across 6 seasons, he only has 48 coverage snaps. So kind of similar in terms of he really doesn't drop in coverage. But once again, he's just such an elite pass rusher, and he's really good against the run. He basically doesn't leave the field for the Raiders. So, I mean, he'll be a huge, impactful player that the Eagles should inquire about and should try to trade for. But once again, I just don't know if they're going to risk all of those assets moving forward for a player like him when they could potentially have holes otherwhere or whatever elsewhere, like moving forward and things like that. It doesn't seem like Howie Roseman. It's been a long, long time since he kind of went all in on, especially trade wise. And you probably have to go back to like the Carson Wentz trade, where as far as like putting together a bunch of assets for one move up into the draft to get him. So you haven't really seen them make. I mean, they traded one first round pick for AJ Brown or a third round pick for Jahan Dotson, like smaller trades involving maybe a pick or two here and there, but they haven't really went all in on a one single player. And I don't know if that's really what a move that they're going to make. But like you said, they're both just such elite, talented players that if they are available, you have to at least check in and see what the price is. But at the same time, I know it's boring and Josh Uche isn't anywhere near the same name. I just think that's more so of a realistic target for the Eagles at the trade deadline this year.
Do you think that there's any, and you mentioned this, I think, on a tweet as well, or at least from what I saw, but do you think there's any, I don't know, skepticism, fear, doubt, whatever we want to call it, in terms of Howie Roseman making a trade at the trade deadline? Like, just based on his recent track record or history of how those deals have turned out?
I mean, yeah, you have to basically go back. Some people want to say that the Golden Tate trade in 2018 was a successful one because he caught the touchdown in the playoffs against the Bears, and then they did get the compensatory pick, I think a fourth round compensatory pick when he left. So, I mean, you can argue about that, but you have to really go back to Jay Ajayi as far as in 2017, as far as a trade that really paid off and the player was a huge contributor. And then obviously they won it all and he played a big role in that. So, but besides that, you got guys like Jannard Avery and Kerry Vincent and I mean, Robert Quinn, not a lot of inspiring names that they've traded for in season. Yeah. So, I mean, it's not, but then again, when you are just trading like late day 3 picks, what are you really expecting? You're not going to get these huge impactful players. So it's kind of the balance that they have to find. I mean, it's a little scary seeing their recent history as far as in-season trades go. But at the same time, if you think a player is going to help, and especially if they have a year on their contract past this season where you kind of get that extra value, which is why I think they ended up trading a little bit more than people expected for a guy like Jahan Dotson because he has that extra year of team control. So, I mean, that factors in, but at the same time, recent history is not the most encouraging sign. So I wouldn't be surprised if they kind of just stand pat at the trade deadline, but if the right player becomes available, they have the assets to kind of make something go.
We shall see. I would still, would like some sort of move, but as you mentioned, it does make sense realistically if they don't go all in, so to speak. Anything is better than Dallas, but we won't go that line necessarily. But within, the state of Texas, I suppose, the Eagles did get a former Baylor player, and I have to at least mention that because, we were talking about Gabe Hall way back whenever he was signed as UDFA and another Baylor guy. So the Eagles do have their Philly dogs, but it's feeling like they're starting to get these Philly Bears, if we would call them that. And I'm a Baylor grad for people that are wondering. Most people know that, but there it is. But Siaki Ika, the defensive tackle, nose tackle, former Baylor player drafted by the Browns in the 3rd round, was a bust for them. Like, they cut him early, didn't have a whole lot of time, right? A season and then an off season or training camp, and then just went ahead and cut him. So, the tape doesn't look great. I'll give you that. For people that have not watched his stats during his first year, his preseason, the second year even, yeah, there's some issues, there's some concern, but there's still some potential. And some people have made the argument or the case like, well, did the Browns use him in the right way? Everything else. But again, you go back to former 3rd round pick, and you texted me as soon as that happened, or very soon, whenever that happened, about, hey, maybe there's a reason why he was signed, and we've kind of seen that play out. But talk us through, what maybe happens here with Siaki Ika, potential that you see in him, and I don't know, any impact for Philly.
Well, like you said, what he did in Cleveland wasn't the most inspiring, but also they played a 4-3 defense, and the pick really never made sense to begin with because he seems like more of a 3-4 nose tackle, kind of like the role that Jordan Davis played, where he just eats up the middle, takes on 2 blockers, and lets the other guys around him kind of get those one-on-one to take advantage of that. But if he was trying to be used as like more of like a 3 technique or whatever, where he's trying to rush the passer, like it seemed like an odd fit from the beginning, and I think that kind of played into why he kind of left Cleveland so quickly. But then, in August when he was waived, I actually said, like, hey, the Eagles don't really have a true nose tackle. I tweeted it out, and of course I brought it up because I like to pat myself on the back whenever I can. But
you nailed it. You did.
I brought it back up because now it's like 2 months later, and sure enough, he is in Philadelphia because, once again, Jordan Davis snaps are declining. I mean, granted, it was more so because the Giants had to pass a ton down the stretch, but I think they realized that they don't really have even on the practice squad, they didn't really have a full-time nose tackle that has the size that Jordan Davis does, because besides Jordan Davis, all their defensive tackles are around like 300 pounds. Milton Williams is 290. I mean, Jalen Carter's 315, but he's not a guy you want just eating 2 blocks. You kind of want to get him those one-on-one matchups and let him kind of utilize his club and all his pass rushing moves. So it seems like maybe they think that either if Jordan Davis gets hurt or whatever, that Siaki Ika can kind of be their insurance plan at nose tackle. So, but as far as I like his fit moving forward, I don't know if he is going to be signed to the active roster. He did just join the team's practice squad, so maybe it's a move that they make further down the line. But it just seems like they kind of want to have somebody within like their rotation between the active roster and the practice squad that they can rely on if anything does happen to Jordan Davis. Because I mean, even a guy like Thomas Booker, who's kind of been stepping in behind Jordan Davis, is also a smaller defensive tackle. So they don't really have that true 335-pound nose tackle that can eat up space like Ika can. So I think that could be his role moving forward, but who knows what will happen as far as being on the active roster or not.
And maybe, it's a big maybe. It's an if. You're taking a chance, but who knows? You've seen guys be signed to the practice squad, end up making the active roster, and eventually making a difference. So who's to say that the film that he's put out there, again, as we said, like NFL-wise, is not anything where you're going like, oh, there's a for sure home run pick. But in a better scheme, better format, obviously Fangio liked him enough to give the okay on, sure, yeah, we could probably use that guy at some point if we needed to. So that, and then also, you look at some other teams later on in the schedule that are heavy run teams, have a focus of that. Like, I don't know, not the worst thing. Doesn't hurt you to have, as you say, the depth there, whether it is Jordan Davis that needs some substitution or a little bit of light of fire behind him to say, hey, there's a potential here, or for depth, even for injuries wise. So I don't know. I'll be interested.
Just one more point on that too. I feel like you have to kind of credit Vic Fangio and Quinn Hurt because of the job that they have done with guys like Moro Ajomo and Thomas Booker, because they didn't really do much to start their career. I mean, they showed flashes here and there, but now this season they've become like legitimate contributors. So it's kind of exciting too to see what they could potentially do with a guy like Ika, who was a 3rd-round pick. And it's not like he was a reach. That was like right around where he was projected to go. So the fact that now he's in Philadelphia and everybody knows when it comes to Howie Roseman in the practice squad, he loves taking chances on guys that kind of failed elsewhere, that were drafted on day 2 or early day 3, and give them another chance. So if this just seems like his next dart throw that he's taking on the practice squad, but maybe you have a little bit of a influence on the practice squad because now, like you said, there's 2 Baylor Bears there. But so maybe you have a little business card that you gotta. It's something's going on there.
It's at some point. There. I'm just saying, maybe we get them on for an interview or something. Sirianni gave my guy a shout out. You probably heard that, but he gave him a shout out at one of the press conferences. I know that's for people going, oh, he just shouts out the whole team. He wanted to. He couldn't remember everyone on the practice squad, but he could remember Gabe Hall. Gabe Hall was, I think, the first player out of his mouth. He's like,
that's a massive guy. You can't if you miss him.
I'm just saying, I instantly took that for total positive signs. Like, all right, Gabe Hall is I don't know. He's taking it to Mekhi Becton and Cam Jurgens in practice squad.
There's nothing better than a Nick Sirianni press conference where he's like, I'm not going to list everybody, and then he literally lists everybody.
But I'm going to list everyone.
He did it with like the wide receivers during training camp. He listed like 13 wide receivers or something like that.
Oh, he's got so far down to.
I mean, it seems like a lot of people hate him, but there's certain aspects of Sirianni that are just so funny to watch, especially in press conferences.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yes. It does make it fun, but still, we see offensively there he gets some hate for some reasons, understandably so on some sides, depending on how you view him. But speaking of the offense, there's potential because the natural inclination with, hey, trade deadline's coming up, as we discussed, pass rush becomes the first point, I think, for almost everyone. It's like, oh, who are they trading for? Who are they trading for defense? Who are they getting for the pass rush? But you made an interesting point. And one of the names offensively for you was Greg Dulcich. And curious to give some more insight on that, of why that could be a move. And also, it seems a little bit more under the radar because, again, like I say, everyone is going that defensive route if you're going to make an acquisition. But why does maybe a little bit of ammunition or depth there make some sense?
Well, I know people might get turned off because it would be the Eagles trading for another kind of failed Broncos tight end, which is a little scary because of what's going on with Albert O. But, I mean, Dulcich he's still 24 years old. During his rookie season, he showed a lot of flashes. I mean, he had 33 receptions for 411 yards and 2 touchdowns in just 6 starts. But, I mean, then he kind of just battled the hamstring injuries for the next season or two. And now this season, he's finally healthy in the second year of Sean Payton being there. and he's basically been a healthy inactive the last couple games, which, I mean, isn't the most encouraging sign, but at the same time, it could be why he's available at the trade deadline. He has one more season remaining on his rookie contract for just $1 million or $1.4 million, something around there. So kind of would be like a kind of another dart throw, like I mentioned with Josh Uche, but this time Dulcich would be on the roster for another season. And I feel like, sure, Grant Calcaterra had a great game in week 6, kind of in relief duty when Dallas Goedert got hurt, but last week it didn't look too great and he didn't really show much promise. So Jack Stoll he's basically a 6th offensive lineman out there. He's never really targeted in the passing game. And Albert O, I mean, he's just been a project for the last 4 years, and it seems like he's never really gonna.
But there's something there.
I mean,
Howie
Roseman refuses to let him go and to give up on him. But I mean, maybe he ends up showing something finally. But he's been given chances on 2 different teams now, hasn't really been able to show anything. I just feel like I've been saying this for years that Dallas Goedert is just consistently hurt, and they haven't really invested properly in a backup behind him. So I know they have CJ Uzomah back on the practice squad and things like that, but I just think kind of making a trade for a tight end. I mentioned a couple other tight ends in the article as well, but I just think that could be like a sneaky addition that they make because Dallas Goedert, like I said, the one consistent thing about him is he's consistently hurt, similar to his best friend Avonte Maddox. So it's just like you have to account for that, and he's 30 years old. He's not getting any younger, so I think it would be time to kind of invest with maybe a late pick. Maybe it's a 2026 6th or 7th round pick, and it's just like something that won't even really affect you at all, and then you kind of just take advantage of it that way. So just another name to keep an eye on, in my opinion.
Love it. Avonte Maddox getting a little shot there at the end.
About that.
He didn't deserve it. Well, maybe he did, but it wasn't warranted for that situation there. But he still got it. So, nonetheless, apologies, Avonte, if you're watching this interview.
It's been a rough year for Avonte Maddox.
It has. But you know what? Kudos to him because he's taken the high road. He even said, like, hey, I'm paying it forward. And, like, all the time that I've had veteran presence and giving tips to Cooper Dejean and everything else. So even if it's just for the wisdom of the game, if he can't physically replicate what he's trying to tell Cooper Dejean to do, okay, but at least Coop is out there playing it. So, kudos to Avonte for seeming to take the high road there, at least with the mentality veteran-wise. But I did have to go back to Dulcich real quick to ask, because I'm sure this would be the question from a lot of people, and I don't know this, so I'm also curious. Can he block? Can he block decently enough? Because that's the whole Grant Calcaterra thing. If we're to trade for him, receiving-wise, you went through a little bit of that, but blocking, would he be... I mean, it's not hard to say he'd be better than Grant Calcaterra.
Yeah, I mean,
can he block?
Grant Calcaterra kind of sets the bar so low that I think anybody would be an improvement in that regard, but I don't think it's kind of his strength either, which might be playing into the factor that like he is a healthy and active for the Broncos. So, I mean, it might be kind of more of the same and a little bit redundant, but at the same time, I just think he's shown more potential as far as also being a pass catcher, which kind of plays a role as well. But at the same time, they can't even really find enough targets for Jahan Dotson as it is. So, I mean, but that's a whole other argument that we may get into, we may not get into. But yeah, it's been a rough time for those 3rd or 4th pass catchers in Philadelphia so far. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, the identity part, and it's kind of a natural, transition into that whole topic because we could say, what are the Eagles? Oddly enough, when we were recording last year, the continual topic was always they don't have an identity. They're trying to find it, everything else. The defense is much closer, I think, to an identity on the defensive side than the offense is, which is so weird because it felt like it'd be the other way around. You go, oh, well, you don't know about this defense. It's young. And they're still growing. Like, it's not like they have a complete yet because it's only the Giants, only the Browns recently. But we feel better, I think, about them than the offensive side. Now, the offense does need to continue to run the ball, and Sirianni said that they run. He said it in a way of what, like a run football team. I don't even think he said specifically a run first football team. He said a run football team. But is that the Eagles' identity? Do you think they're a full blown? I guess we probably would argue like maybe that's what they should do. But is that the Eagles' identity? And can it get them to a Super Bowl? Can they win a Super Bowl? Because there's a big argument recently. John Stolas wrote an article for Bleeding Green Nation. There were others that kind of had follow-up articles or similar lines of thinking. But it's this whole line of thought like, yeah, running is great, but you can only get so far. Eventually you need the passing game. It's definitely got to be better and efficiency and everything there. But can the Eagles, win with that identity and ultimately being a run football team only, or to what extent?
Helps.
Oh, well.
Right there.
Okay. So now we know.
But yeah, I mean, I think as far as like even both sides of the ball, I just think the Eagles right now, their identity is being a physical football team because on the defense especially, it seems like they're flying around, especially these last 2 weeks since like the bye week and kind of Cooper Dejean got inserted into that starting nickel role. I feel like the defense looks drastically better. I mean, granted, it could be because they played two of the worst offenses in the NFL, which is why this week's matchup is so important to kind of see where they really rank as far as like a defense in the NFL. But then you also saw the offense kind of lean more into the running game, and you're seeing like Saquon Barkley just telling them to run a tush push again or just take it himself and talking trash. It just seems like then they obviously have the deep passes that they rely on, maybe a little bit too much, but that kind of works hand in hand when you establish the run where you can kind of use the play action and kind of take your chances with those deep shots to A.J. Brown, who's been basically unguardable as far as one-on-one situations. So, I mean, you want to see guys like Devonta Smith and Jahan Dotson involved more, but at the same time, if Jalen Hurts only has to throw 15 to 20 times a game and you're able to get 150 to 200 yards on the ground or maybe even more and kind of dominate the time of possession and then have your defense kind of just be the backbone of the team as a whole. I mean, who cares? If you're winning, you're winning. I don't know if people want this to be a team that scores 30 to 40 points a game and they're just lighting up the scoreboard because they have all this talent. But if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And they're going to have their fifth different offensive line combination, which kind of plays a role as well. I think both of the starting guards, including Landon Dickerson, haven't really played as well as they have in recent years. I mean, Landon Dickerson's already given up 3 sacks and 11 total pressures or something like that, which is kind of uncharacteristic for him. But Mekhi Becton's also given up 3 sacks. So that's a little bit scary, but the offensive tackles have been phenomenal. They've both given up, I think, maybe 1 sack combined, but obviously now Jordan Mailata's out. So you have Frank Johnson in there, which is a concern. So, I mean, if they have to lean on the run, they lean on the run, and it's an ugly football team that just wins in a physical manner. And I think people are too concerned about being pretty or how it looks, whereas I think last season they won a couple games like that, and then they obviously saw down the stretch that they kind of fell apart, and they didn't really have an identity to lean on. So if they can kind of embrace early in the season that they're going to be a physical football team and just win that way, then so be it. But, I mean, winning is winning. I know it's like the Al Davis way of saying just win, but that's truly what it comes down to because if they're winning, I don't think anybody cares about how it looks or how many touchdowns Jalen Hurts has. It's just about winning and making a deep postseason run. I mean, they certainly have the talent to win the Super Bowl, but it's a matter of putting it all together, being consistent, limiting turnovers, and seeing how that goes.
It doesn't have to be pretty, that's true. Just win, as you say. Talking about the identity, though, you personally have a new identity on X or Twitter. So just to make sure and mention that to people as well, Anthony DiBona at DiBona NFL. There's been a change of sorts. Curious if you wanted to enlighten the readers and viewers as far as a little bit of a shift on your coverage of the Eagles and where they can find that content.
Yeah, so Pro Football Network, I've kind of shifted back over to kind of a full, as far as like a holistic NFL analyst role where I'm covering all the teams. It could be mostly primetime games, things like that. But then they kind of allowed me to find a role somewhere else where I can kind of focus on the Eagles as well. So now you can find that coverage at Philly Sports Network and Metro Philly, where I'll be having a couple articles a week, and I'll be having an Eagles mailbag, which is the article that Josh referenced to earlier. So I'll be doing that weekly. You can send me questions in on X or Twitter, whatever you want to call it. So that's something that'll be a weekly series moving forward. So I'm excited about that. And obviously I get a chance to talk about the Eagles on here as well, but that'll always be the team that I kind of focus the most on social media. That I like covering the league as a whole as well. But yeah, that's the reason for the change to my Twitter handle. And I appreciate everybody that follows and interacts with me on there. There
we go. Awesome. Do some incredible work. So again, as always, make sure to go follow if you are not, because you're missing out. But at DiBona NFL, so the change there if you're seeing the username. Also, like you said, we got the link in the description for those articles on that side. Defensive identity, talking about some changes there. We've seen some little more physicality. We've seen some better things, obviously, coming out of the bye week. And we can certainly credit that to, as people have said, I've had a number of comments that I mention a little bit of optimism and I get blown up for it because it's like, it's the Browns, it's the Giants. And I understand that. Like they're not good offenses, sure. But there's still progression that we've seen from the defense. There's still areas that the guys individually as players are showing things that it's like, okay, there's a little bit more confidence. There's a little bit more of picking up the scheme. There's some adjustments on Fangio's side. There's some play calls that he's making. There's some blitzes that are still four-man pressures, but they're a very unique way at bringing pressure or trying to overload one side that it's like, you know what, we didn't see that. We hadn't seen that near as much in the first couple weeks. So still, we will temper those expectations. But there was something very interesting that I found, and we were talking about this before the recording here, that Chris Franklin, shout out to him, great job on the reporting on this side, but somehow it escaped me because this was like 4 or 5 days ago whenever this article came out. But Chris wrote about how Nakobe Dean was talking to him and sharing of an incident that happened at practice the week leading up to the Cleveland Brown game. So coming off of the bye, practicing before, I don't know, 3 or 4 days before the Cleveland game, there was an incident that Nakobe Dean said happened at practice that would have, for a lot of teams, separated them or broken them apart, had some different splinters and things like that. Didn't go into detail what the incident was, but just that there was something that would have typically pulled the team apart. And he said instead it kind of galvanized the group. Now they're closer, the chemistry is better, the morale, he said everyone's focused, the goals are on the same page now, as well as trusting the coordinators and the game plan and the scheme and everything else there. So, you know, positive, right, to hear that. But then you kind of wonder, like, what was the reason? What's going on there? Before we get to that take, though, just hearing, though, like Nakobe, hey, here's what happened. This galvanized us to be on the right page. What immediate takeaways on that before we get into, because, you know, there's conspiracies for everything. But before we get there, just the positives and takeaways on hearing that story of practice.
I mean, it's obviously, it seems like it worked. Whatever happened, I mean, it seemed like they kind of put it past themselves because they put together arguably their 2 best performances of the season. I know the Browns game, people wanted them to win by more, but like I said, you just want to win and kind of build that momentum and just keep going forward, using that and carrying it into future games. So, I mean, like you said, they're going to speculate and say, maybe this guy was involved, or maybe Nick Sirianni shaved his head because of this. Like, there's always going to be, especially in like the Philadelphia market, there's always going to be these narratives that people want to try and create or spin things a certain way. So you kind of have to just think on your own and certain things. But like a thing like this, like you said, I'm surprised it wasn't even blown up by anybody, like bigger in terms of like a social media, different accounts that kind of share this news and kind of, I mean, you know who I'm alluding to, but there's plenty of people out there
that would love to run with this thing.
Yeah,
so.
Exactly. So, oh my God, Eagles falling apart, huge brawl,
massive fight at Eagles practice. Yeah.
Exactly. So there's like plenty of different ways that this kind of could have been spun, and then whatever it is, it seems like Nakobe Dean was willing to talk about it, where he probably didn't have to mention it at all, and he's viewed as one of the younger leaders on the defense. So if he's saying that they were able to kind of grow from him and move forward, the last 2 weeks sure seemed like it's kind of worked as well. So I mean, I'm not going to dive too deep into it and speculate what it could be, but you said there's some conspiracy theories out there. So
there's certainly some conspiracy theories out there. We won't go too deep with those, but you know, recently on a live stream, I had a subscriber bring up the fact, you know, hey, everybody's got, I think, a little conspiracy theory willingness in them to a certain extent. I don't know if I'm buying this, but the Devin White was released, I believe, on October 8th, if I'm not mistaken, and that would have been like 4 or 5 days before the Eagles played the Browns. So, you know, then the conspiracy becomes, was it Devin White? Was he doing something? Did he get involved in some sort of incident that, you know, Howie Roseman then he was already inactive for a while, but that was enough. That was to be like, all right, we're getting rid of this guy. You know, if he had seen the field and then they cut him like that feels a little bit more plausible. But the fact that they were not going to do anything with him, obviously they made that very clear because they were not making him active even on game days. I can't really get behind that one as much, but that is anyway one of the most biggest conspiracy theories out there for what's happened to Devin White, which by the way is now signed to Houston and D'Amico Ryans. So I'm sure he'll turn into a Pro Bowler in Houston.
Houston's taken all of the old Eagles guys. I mean, if you want to consider Devin White an Eagles guy, because I mean, he really didn't play for them, but
True.
They have Derek Barnett, obviously. They worked out, I think, Teron Jackson recently. Sean Bradley is on their practice squad. So they're taking all the misfits from Philadelphia and kind of seeing what they can do with them. So, I mean, they're a phenomenal team, so something's working. So shout out to D'Amico Ryans, though. He was a great Eagles linebacker, and it's cool to see him kind of develop into one of the better head coaches in the league today. He was.
And, you know, if anybody can turn around Devin White, as still, I remember, I don't know that it'll take me a while to forget. And if Devin White starts playing really well, because, you know, keep an eye, make sure that this does not turn into, because if it does, then I'll be thinking back to myself when I go, the Pivot podcast where Devin White's going like, oh yeah, the reason I wanted to come to Philly is because I wanted to be what they haven't had in a long time. They haven't had that linebacker. And it's like, well, we 3-4 straight inactive games and get cut. Like we've had plenty of, Miles Jack. We've had plenty of those types of situations. But moving on, there's on the offensive side, there's this argument that is probably not going to stop for a while. It's going to take a significant output from Jalen and his I guess improvement, efficiency, playing the quarterback position, quick decision making, you name it. There's lots of areas, using the middle of the field, all this other stuff. And we've seen the offense of just like, at times it looks like more of some Kellen Moore things that we had seen in the offseason, I guess, watching film, but then even in training camp hearing about reports. And then there's other times where it's like, man, this is so vanilla. This is definitely what we saw prior to Kellen Moore, Sirianni's offense, all this other stuff. But the argument has still become now, it's like, oh, well, the Eagles can't win with Jalen Hurts. Like he's not the guy. He can't make it happen. And Greg Cosell, I think he does a great film breakdown. I don't agree with all of his viewpoints, but he absolutely knows the game of football. So, everyone gets things wrong at times. I could certainly be in that boat, but still he was knocking Jalen Hurts quite a bit. And he has in several past instances, but recently saying like, oh, there's slow progressions, there's slow reads, he's missing plays, he's not seeing it quickly, he's obviously taking too much time. It goes down the list, like so many other criticisms of Jalen Hurts. But then to kind of build off of that, then the storyline has become, again, like I say, Jalen Hurts is just not the guy that they can win with. Do you go to that extreme? Because I know it's quick, people overreactions and like, you want to go take it one way or another. But I've gotten a lot recently of he's just average. He's never going to be better than that. This offense is not for him. He's going to be, bad. We're not even making the playoffs. All sorts of negativity based on those comments and based on that reaction. But where do you fall with Jalen Hurts and the weekly question of Jalen Hurts' progression or regression?
Well, unfortunately, the last time I was on the show, I kind of said outright that I thought Jalen Hurts was regressing. And it seems like, last week's performance was obviously the team as a whole played better, but sure, there were plays that Jalen Hurts kind of missed as well. But I think now a lot of people are kind of going to the extreme in one direction where, he was regressing. He's not playing the best, but he's not like one of the worst quarterbacks in the NFL where people are saying they can't win with him. He can't make simple plays. Sure, he missed things, but they're also 5-1 right now. If Saquon Barkley just catches that pass that he did make, that was a simple pass.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
You can kind of nitpick and kind of say, oh, he missed that pass to Saquon Barkley against the Giants, or he overthrew here, or he took a sack here when he shouldn't have, and he's too slow. You could do that with basically any quarterback this season. Some of the best players in the game are leading the league in NFL and leading the NFL in interceptions. So, you could really, if you really want to do that with any quarterback, you probably could at this point in this season, especially. It's been a very odd year, and like I mentioned before, with as far as like the different offensive line combinations and things like that. That hasn't been the best for him as well as far as the situation. But he's in like a lose-lose situation, because if he does play well and he puts up 300 passing yards, 3 touchdowns, people are going to say, oh, well, of course he should do that. He has A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith and Saquon Barkley. And then if he puts up a stinker where he completes 10 or 14 passes and Saquon Barkley kind of carries them to a win, then they say, oh, they don't even need Jalen Hurts. They could just have Kenny Pickett do that. It's just like, there's really no like winning for him, unfortunately, and that's kind of the situation.
Real ones know better than that, but you're right.
Yeah, but it's just like
could do that.
But honestly, that's like some of the extremes that I've seen. It's just like, oh, he's not even a starting quarterback in this league. That's ridiculous. I've been one of Hurts' biggest critics, but at the same time, he's still a solid quarterback with potential to be elite. Because just 2 years ago, we saw him outduel Patrick Mahomes in the Super Bowl in the biggest game of his career. So sure, he hasn't looked the best since then, but then again, the last 2 games, he hasn't turned the ball over. They won. So, if it isn't pretty, it's not how you like it, then that's your problem. It's not really. The Eagles aren't concerned, like I said, about how it looks. And it doesn't seem like Jalen Hurts complains about it either or cares how it looks. He's just all about winning. So if that means he has to throw less and hand the ball off more or whatever, then so be it. But so many people are wrapped up in it has to look this way, or he's doing this wrong, and they're still winning. They still want to talk about him. It's unfortunately just the situation that he's in, being in a city like Philadelphia.
Yeah, he gets a lot of criticism. Some warranted, a lot.
Yeah, absolutely
unwarranted or to the extreme. But yeah, you're right. It's on both there. But whatever it takes to win, as you say there. Unfortunately, the Eagles have never won in Cincinnati. They're 0-4-1, and that's what's up on the plate here. Some people believe in curses and jinxes and everything else. You're going into the jungle. It's not always an easy place to play to begin with, but you have the track record of history not being with you, and a Bengals team that for whatever reason doesn't seem to start seasons off well and then starts to hit a stride because they're like, oh, maybe we need to start catching up here and start playing some catch up. So this is usually when the Bengals get things together, and we've started to see it's a little bit of a similar story. Now, the counter argument to that is they have wins versus the Panthers, against the Browns, and against the Giants. So that's no Super Bowl contenders there, unfortunately. Sorry for those teams, but those are not going to be the cream of the crop, and they certainly are not for the beginning part of the season. But getting into this matchup of the Eagles and the Bengals, where do you see, I guess we'll start out maybe with like the matchups, but matchups to keep an eye on, the biggest game changers or areas of those matchups that are really going to have the biggest impact on the game?
So I've got a couple that I've highlighted here, but the first one I feel like is the biggest. It's going to be like kind of like the chess match between Vic Fangio and Joe Burrow, because the last 2 weeks we've seen what kind of Vic Fangio has been able to do as far as like the simulated pressures and Cooper DeJean's role. I feel like it's kind of changed the entire defense with what they're able to do. So, it's going to be interesting to see what the defense can do against such an elite offense and such an elite quarterback, because Joe Burrow is playing at a very high level this year. And Jamar Chase is regarded as one of the best receivers in the league. He leads the NFL or close to it in a lot of the major categories. And then Tee Higgins is obviously great. Andre Yoshivas is their third receiver. He's shown a ton of like upside and made big plays here and there. So they've only played each other once, and they have to go back to 2021. And the Bengals won 15-10 over Vic Fangio's Broncos, but Burrow was only 15 of 22 for 157 yards and 1 touchdown. And then Jamar Chase and Tee Higgins combined for 3 receptions for just 26 yards. But Tyler Boyd kind of went off. He had like 96 yards and he led their offense, but he kind of held the other 2 guys in check. So it's going to be fun to kind of see that battle between those two and how that kind of goes this week. And then obviously jumping from that, you have to mention the matchup between Quinyon Mitchell and Jamar Chase in particular. They're going to move Jamar Chase around. He doesn't necessarily line up always on one side. So there's going to be matches between those two, and it's going to be fun because Quinyon Mitchell kind of held his own against Malik Neighbors. He held his own against Mike Evans, and now this is kind of the next stepping stone for him, where he's against arguably one of the 2 or 3 best receivers in the NFL. So it's going to be really, really fun to see that battle, because both of them don't mind like pushing and shoving and talking trash. So I think that's going to be must-see TV for anybody that's watching. Like, you have to be honed in on that matchup in particular.
Oh, heck yeah. Yeah, the physicality, like you say, they're going to be a lot of physicality, some trash talking. I would love it if we get a mic'd up segment from the Eagles of, Quinyon Mitchell in this game. A lot you might not be able to actually listen back to because it's censored, but still, it'd be nice if we could get a little insert of, what Q's saying after, your route's trash or just anything like that, because he's got the dog in him and he's not afraid to, it doesn't matter who it is. He's like to Mike Evans even, he's saying like, Mike Evans is saying, do you know who I am? And Q's even go, do you know who I am? It's like, what? It's like Mike Evans is like, no, I don't know who you are. But it's like, well, okay.
He definitely doesn't lack confidence. And that's funny because I actually talk about Quinyon Mitchell as kind of his first 6 career games in the NFL, and stacked up against like the top 5 or so cornerbacks in the NFL right now, and how those kind of rank side by side, and his upcoming matchup with Jamar Chase in my next article that should be coming out soon for Philly Sports Network. So you could check that out too. But yeah, that matchup between Quinyon Mitchell and Jamar Chase is going to be fun, and I can't wait to watch it.
And also another point as well of Christian Parker, right? Like that's another emphasis or a point that, it doesn't get talked about a ton, and understandably so, because Vic Fangio is like the defensive coordinator. He's going to get the initial credit and everything else for the defense. But the progression or the development of Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean, first and foremost, as well as the other secondary members, but those two, it is tons of credit to Christian Parker, I think, because you look at what he did with Patrick Surtain. He talked about you learn from those experiences. You're able to see how to help progress a player who has lots of potential, but, get them acclimated to the NFL game. And Dave Zangaro had a fantastic story of outlining the relationship between Coop and Q and Christian Parker, and kind of the open door policy. And he was saying, Christian Parker was saying like, oh yeah, I'll get texts all the time, like late at night, a picture or a video of a play, and then he knows next day he's going to get one of them to show up in his office to go over that play. He's like, hey, here's what I want to go over. Here's what I want to know. And it's great because they're getting the back and forth, but he's also put the homework on them of like, don't just send me something. Like, I need you to send me something and show up with what are you seeing? How do you see this thing playing out? Where should you be positioned and all this other stuff so that he understands, how can he help coach, help them to get to the next level. And I know it's early, but as you said, and listen out specifically for Q, because he's played longer than Coop, who had the injury. But I mean, both of them changed this defense dramatically. Like, you saw the difference with Q early on, and then Coop gets inserted, once he comes back from the hamstring injury, and or hamstring injury, and then getting developed to be ready whenever Fangio was saying like, yeah, we're not sure initially. It's night and day difference. It's not only physicality, it's blitzing. In the game that you mentioned, the 15-10 game, Justin Simmons had 1.5 sacks against Burrow. So, it's like, okay, your safety's getting some sacks. There's sending some blitzes, which we've seen. It could be a slot, could be a safety, but it's just that versatility that, I remember we talked about all the way back at the draft, and I was asking you like, hey, does Dejean fit, in this defense? Where do you see him? And you had the great write-up on like, who knows where his position is. You could call it like safety, you could call it a slot, nickel, but it's like, he's a playmaker. He's just insert him wherever, and that's where we're starting to see him get utilized around the field. And again, I think to myself, I'm like, these guys are rookies, and how long Philly can have them, it's very early, and we still need to see that against continue with the high competition and consistency there. But it's night and day difference when they're on the field.
But even like the small things with Cooper DeJean, you could see it, especially last week. I saw somebody pointed out, it might have been Fran Duffy but like you see Cooper DeJean, he starts at the slot, they're in zone coverage. So he kind of drops back, then his guy kind of crosses his face and goes into where Nakobe Dean should cover. Mm-hmm. And he literally like makes eye contact with Nakobe Dean, points to the guy. Sure enough, Nakobe Dean drops back, gets enough depth. He carries his guy, and then Reed Blankenship steps up and covers him the rest of the way. It was just like such a fluid play. Like, you didn't really see that communication to kind of start the season. And it just seems like these last 2 weeks with the Cooper DeJean kind of taking on a bigger role, it makes you wonder, like, what if he did start playing a little bit earlier, but at the same time, maybe it was kind of the perfect plan to get him where he can succeed, where he to the level that he is now. Because, I mean, as I was prepping for this show, I was on Pro Football Focus, and I think he was rated like the second or third as far as like a coverage grade among all cornerbacks. So, I mean, you could take that for a grain of salt. I know their grading system is a little bit controversial, but There's no denying that he's played at a very high level and probably exceeded a lot of people's expectations for what he's done in Philadelphia so far.
Hopefully he can keep it up. We'll say that. Definitely with if they're going to get the win, the first win ever in Cincinnati, have that play, have the good plays from the rooks. Maybe hold on to an interception if you're Q. Sorry, Q. But just turnover. We need one or two or more than that even, but just a few. It would be nice. Having said that, though, where are some areas that the Eagles can take advantage or exploit the Bengals, whether offense or defense, but just some areas that fans can keep an eye on there?
Well, before I jump into that, I had just one more kind of player to watch from Cincy, and that's Trey Hendrickson versus Fred Johnson as far as like a matchup to watch for. Because Hendrickson is like far and away their best pass rusher. He has 35 total pressures, 7 sacks this season. The next closest on their team is Sam Hubbard, who has just 12 total pressures and 2 sacks. So basically, they should be focusing entirely on stopping Trey Hendrickson and do not leave him on an island with Fred Johnson, because that's not going to end well. I know I said kind of last week, I wrote about Fred Johnson kind of playing better on the left side, but that kind of went all out the window once he went against Brian Burns and the Giants. So if they're going to leave him one-on-one against Trey Hendrickson, that's not going to be great. But moving forward, as far as like players that the Eagles can attack, similar to the Eagles, Cincinnati's starting guards are not the greatest in pass protection. Alex Kappa and Cordell Volson have allowed 14 total pressures each so far this season. And Kappa has allowed 4 sacks. Volson has allowed 2 sacks. And then another kind of interesting area that they can kind of take advantage of as far as a pass rush. And you mentioned kind of Cooper DeJean blitzing. So their running back, Zach Moss, I know they play Chase Brown as well, but Zach Moss has given up 2 sacks in pass protection as well. So if they can kind of maybe Vic Fangio notices that and they see when he's in the backfield, like, hey, we should send an extra blitzer or kind of drop an edge back and send this guy that they're not expecting, either an inside linebacker or a defensive back, and kind of throw Zach Moss off, because it seems like he's allowing a lot of pressure despite not really having a ton of opportunities in pass protection. Mm-hmm. And then lastly, Cam Taylor-Britt. I know he talks a lot of trash. He's been in the media quite a bit this season, kind of talking about Xavier Worthy and things like that. And
Little
he
bit.
held his own against Xavier Worthy, but he hasn't really been the best player for them. So he's allowed 355 receiving yards this season and 4 touchdowns and a passer rating of 128.9, which is not too far from perfect. So if you can kind of get that guy isolated against, especially A.J. Brown, where he's been unstoppable, I feel like he's kind of a player that they can kind of target pretty effectively on Sunday.
Okay. Yeah. It really doesn't matter, I guess, who it is. If it's, name any corner you want to. If it's AJ, we'll still take that. But yeah, with those numbers, for sure. Whether it's an AJ, if it's Smitty actually, having a solid game after his 1 catch for -2 yards. But very interesting. Definitely something to keep an eye out for. As far as anything, I guess you kind of mentioned it with Fred Johnson. Is there anything else, though, areas to watch out for, cautious from the Eagles, something that the Cincinnati might be able to exploit more so on Philly's side?
I mean, you just have to be worried about Cincinnati's quick game. I saw a stat, I think it was from Shane Half, where if anything, any pass behind the line of scrimmage or within 10 yards, Joe Burrow is completing 90% of his passes, and it's just they're just on fire in that regard, which is where you have to worry, because if they kind of put the added pressure on the Eagles to make tackles in space. I know Darius Slay and Quinyon Mitchell have kind of improved in that area, and it's not been as much of a weakness as it was last season, but to start this year, they had a lot of missed tackles. They cleaned it up the last 2 weeks against 2 kind of mediocre offenses. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Cincinnati kind of test them with the quick game early, kind of like the Bucs did, where they kind of just were marching down the field with these short passes, kind of death by a million paper cuts. So it feels like that can be kind of a tactic that Cincinnati uses, but hopefully the Eagles are kind of prepared for that. Maybe you use a little bit more press coverage and allow these guys to be a little bit more physical and limit them that way.
Yeah, that's my, I guess, immediate fear. Whenever I hear that, I think of okay, the Bucs game, the quick game. If there's missed tackles, and how bad that can get from the beginning. But if there's one thing to come from that, we say, what, learning experience. Awful game there in Tampa several weeks ago, but if you can use that for your benefit and say, all right, if there's a quick game scenario or you're able to use that press coverage, hopefully we see it. So Eagles underdogs, they're I believe 2.5 point underdogs officially as of right now, but it's a 47.5, I believe, is also the total. So decent scoring game, nothing crazy, but a decent one there. Going into this matchup, as we enter with the score predictions, do you have a good idea yet on what you would go with score wise?
It's so tough because it's so funny also going into this matchup because they've literally played the same 2 teams over the last 2 weeks, just kind of in reverse order. I mean, the Bengals beat the Giants in week 6. They beat them only 17-7. And then they beat the Browns last week only 21-14. And then the Eagles obviously beat the Browns 20-16, not the biggest margin, but then they kind of blew out the Giants 28-3. So it seems like this can kind of be a huge matchup for both teams where they're kind of measuring themselves up against another team that's played similar opponents, but is supposed to be make a late playoff push or even a Super Bowl run. So it's going to be a fun matchup. I don't know where I want to go score-wise. I mean, it's tough because I just get so scared with how good Joe Burrow is playing and that he's going to get rid of the ball too quickly and that the Eagles aren't even going to be able to get to him as far as the pass rush goes. I mean, this isn't Daniel Jones or Deshaun Watson that they're playing. Joe Burrow is he's a different level of quarterback. And so, I mean, in that case, I think it'll be a higher scoring than that line that you mentioned, but I'll go Bengals 31, Eagles 27. Okay.
Yikes. 31 points, Garrett up. I mean, I hear you. I hear you with Burrow, and I'm gonna say I've been saying. I guess I'll stick with it. I was gonna say you might be talking me into changing it a little bit, but I'll stick with mine. I've been saying 23-20 Eagles, so I'm gonna stick with that. I'm gonna believe in it. Tee Higgins did pop up as questionable with a quad injury on the injury report. So who knows, could play, maybe not 100%, possibly plays a factor. I like the stat that you brought up as well of the 3 catches for 26 yards combined that they had the last time Fangio was coaching against them. So I don't know, if defense could do something, we finally get a turnover. It's been forever. I know typically we'd say hey, whoever has the best quarterback is going to win the game, better chance to win the game. And I don't mind saying, I'll say that I'm the biggest Jalen supporter there is right now, but Burrow's a better quarterback. As of today, Burrow is a better quarterback. And, I think most people would logically agree with that. But I think this game could be this game could be solid. Again, we say Jalen does not have to be elite to win the game. If he's good and does not turn the ball over, I think this defense can get a turnover or two on Cincinnati, and we're going to eke out a win. We're going to get 23-20.
Yeah, because this could be a game where they really don't have to use Jalen Hurts a bunch and kind of lean on the run, because I have a little bit more stats here, but the Bengals have allowed 65 rushing first downs, which is the second most in the NFL, and they've allowed 8 rushing touchdowns, which is the fourth most in the NFL. So, I mean, you can take advantage of their defense on the ground, and then obviously, like I mentioned, Cam Taylor-Britt and a couple of their defensive backs aren't the greatest in pass coverage as well. So, I mean, you can take advantage of it. I mean, that's the thing, is just look at the shootout they got into with the Ravens, where it was like 41-38. It looked like one of those like late night Pac-12 games that you see in college, where like it was just like who's going to have the ball last is going to win, because it was just like everybody was scoring. So I mean, I don't know if it comes into that scenario, if the Eagles can really keep up with Cincinnati because of how well their passing attack is. And I think Chase Brown and Zach Moss are kind of underrated as far as running backs go as well. So it's just going to be a great test for the Eagles. The last thing you want to see is just a blowout where it looks like it's not even close, and the Eagles kind of just get embarrassed. But even if they lose, if they can keep it relatively close and kind of get them, like, I know nobody wants to see that, but I mean, it would kind of be a little bit more encouraging than just getting embarrassed like they were against the Buccaneers. So obviously you want to see a win and you want to see a convincing win, but like I said, if they can just win and move forward, that'll be huge for them, because the schedule gets a little bit easier moving forward, but we'll see what happens.
Take advantage of it. Yep. If you get this win, then it sets up Jacksonville, and then at Dallas. Dallas is not that much of a difficult challenge as of right now. Don't think anything will really change there. And then the Commanders game, sets up for a good matchup Thursday Night Football, which will be at that game. So, shout out to everybody there who's going to be at the game. We may see everyone. But let us know, as we're talking about the Cincinnati game, score predictions. What do you think? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Who's going to win the game? Let us know below. Reminder again, too, I'm going to be streaming during the game. And if you show up, if the Eagles win and you show up afterward, I'm going to give away a jersey to some random person during the stream. So get down on that. But let us know also thoughts on everything else here, what you agree with, what you disagree with. Appreciate all the support, and make sure to follow the man himself right there, Anthony DiBona, at DiBona NFL, officially with a change there. But a blast as always. Really appreciate it. And make sure to buy one of these shirts and support Josh and everything that he's doing. I appreciate the plug. Yes. I'll get you the money later, but appreciate the plug. It was fun though. But no, appreciate it, guys. Like and subscribe. Until next time, we'll see you. Go Birds.